Hi, I'm Faye.
And I'm Tracey, and welcome to More Better with Tracey and Faye. So, most people like me and you who've built their career in communications have a lot of experience writing for an executive audience. It comes with the territory. So whether we are sending the executives a request for information, or we are responding to their request for information, or if you are writing on their behalf as an executive ghostwriter, which I've done a ton of in my career, interacting with executives, it comes with the territory and a communications role. And for me, it started from very early on. So it's an audience I have a lot of familiarity with.
Yeah, you probably have more experience than I do in that space, though I have written, as you say, for a VP on their behalf, or you write a message in their voice, right? Like that's always been interesting. People always ask me, how do you like so and so? I loved how they expressed that. I'm sure you've gotten that a few times, and you're like,
Actually remember, if I can just
yeah,
with a short story.
okay.
There was an executive, a CEO, who I worked with very closely for about a decade. And then he retired. And a new guy came in. And I remember this conversation clear as day. Someone said to me, I always appreciated the fact that this ex-CEO always wrote his own president's messages. And I looked at them and I said, no, he didn't. I wrote them. And they said, really? Sounded exactly like him. I said, thank you.
That's a great compliment.
It was a great compliment. I was a little bit affronted, but actually it was a great compliment but that's not really what the topic of this episode is about. But writing in someone else's voice is a whole other thing. And
yeah, maybe that's another
interested,
episode.
we can talk about it. But anyway, getting back on track.
Okay, back on track. So yeah, so Tracey and I, we were invited to deliver a workshop about communicating with executive decision makers to a team who wanted to gain and understand, like, what is it about? Who are these decision makers? How can I better communicate with them? They wanted they wanted to understand that audience a bit more. So the audience, when we were trying to design, we were designing this workshop, the audience is clear: executive decision makers. And the objective, because we always start with audience and adaptive, getting approval on their proposal, recommendation. They're asking for something. What was less clear to them, though, was that what kind of information or context this executive decision making audience needs, so that their objective, i.e., approval on the proposals, would be achieved. And that's what we want to talk about today: what you need to take into account when writing for executive decision makers. We'll be exploring this topic through two lenses: how executives are typically measured, and the environment in which executives typically work. So I'm going to dive first into how executives are typically measured. So this is I'm going to say this in general terms. So there's I would say three buckets in how executives are measured, because frankly, that's what they care about. So we got to go where people gather, which is, what do they care about? What do executives care about? They care about three main things. And I'm going to dive into each of those things in a minute. Money, very important. Market, and exposure. So what I want to say, so in those three buckets, so if you think about money, market, and exposure, executives have an obligation to drive, I'm going to say, drive levers. Does that make sense? Drive levers, drive things up or down within those categories. So bear with me. Money. So in the money space, executives want to drive up revenue and profit. I know it sounds simple, but they want to drive that up. What they want to drive down in the money space are costs, right? So reduce those costs. That's what you're hearing about. So really, the money bucket is about financial health of the organization. Market. So what they want to drive up in market space is market share, right? We need more people. We want to get a bigger piece of that pie, whatever your market is. What they want to drive down in the market space is time to market. So how do we shorten getting product, service, whatever that is, all about delivery to the market, so that the faster I can get to the market, it speaks to competition and all of those pieces. The shorter I can make that time, I can up that market share. So that's what executives in that market space would really care about. The last bucket is exposure. So how do I want to drive up exposure? What does that mean? So in the exposure area, we think about it in terms of retention. So how do I retain my customers? How do I retain my employees, especially my top performers? How do I retain partnerships, vendors, all of those things? So they want to drive up that retention so that they can maintain those relationships. So that's how I think about it in the exposure space. But what do they want to drive down when it comes to exposure? Risk. Yeah, I want to make sure that we're compliant with regulations, that we're compliant, I don't know, with the law. That's kind of important. so in those three buckets, so if you think about it, typically those three buckets, money, market, and exposure, and how executives are thinking about in those three buckets, is a really great way to sort of ground your understanding of how executives make decisions, what they're thinking about. And I would recommend that if you're creating a recommendation, a proposal, or communicating with executives, make that link to those levers, because that's what they're concerned about. Anything to add there, Tracey?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And the thing I would add is to remember that these levers and these buckets are very personal. These are how these executives are compensated. Their compensation is tied to increasing profits, increasing revenues, driving down costs, managing risk, deepening relationships, all the levers up and down that Faye was talking about. Those are measurements for how those people sitting in those executive chairs are actually measured and compensated. So it's very personal. And the better able that you are to make the links between whatever it is that you're talking about or needing their input or approval on, tie it directly to the things that are most meaningful to them. Because yes, they are looking at corporate health, but they're also looking at their own compensation.
Yeah. You'll see those levers. So once you understand, or I hope that gives people a framework for understanding, okay, well, not just my executive audience, but now you can go for any company that you work for and you think about what are their strategic goals for the year, right? We're all like, it's, how are they planning their goals or objectives for the year? You'll start to see that I bet you could take those strategic goals and match them up to those levers. Right? You'll be able to see, they want to have an operating margin of X amount. Oh, that's about driving down costs. Oh, we need to have we want to expand our, I don't know, business to these countries or to these areas. Oh, that's about market share. So hopefully that gives you a good framework to sort of connect your work to what executives are concerned about, but also to the goals of the organization.
I have a really good example of that, actually. I'm going back 15 years or so.
Oh, just checking.
15 years ago.
Oh, back in
the last millennium. Let's talk about what happened the last millennium.
I hope that there are not people who are going, I wasn't born 15 years ago. No, I'm just joking. So
could be.
Maybe.
So when diversity and inclusion now it's called diversity, equity, and inclusion. But when diversity and inclusion I was in an organization and they were trying to make that a more important piece of organizational goals and organization's goals. And at the time, the conversation started around, well, it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. It's fair. It's equitable. It was all these nice, squishy, warm and fuzzy kind of goals.
Squishy.
And in fact, there was a senior woman in the organization who was tasked with rejuvenating these diversity and inclusion efforts at the organization. And she kept reaching out to me to be the communications person as part of this committee. And I was avoiding her like crazy because I thought, I just could not see the connection. I thought, this is a make work project. This isn't going to go anywhere. And then she got me down for coffee one day And she shared data that talked about when you put more effort into these spaces, when you get, say, more women or more diversity at the senior table, it's decision-making table, your bottom line increases.
There you
Your
go.
retention of people increases. You get a more diverse sales team can appeal to a more diverse audience of potential clients.
Yep.
So all these things around DEI were measured in executive terms that they understood. And at that meeting with the senior woman who was sharing this with me, I went, now I get this. Now I get, number one, I didn't know the importance. I really did not know the connection between DEI and all these bottom line numbers that were really important to any organization. But it also gave us a lever or a something to stand on to say, you should pay attention to this, because you might think the idea of getting more women into these roles just is a make good, feel good kind of project, but actually it's going to increase your bottom line because the data proves it. And so speaking to executives in those terms, it was a game changer.
Awesome. That's great. Good story. Cool.
All right. So now that we have that understanding, the other thing that we wanted to share with you is the environment in which executives work. Because, you'll hear this, oh my God, I'm so busy, I'm so stressed. Well, it's true. It's true. The number of stuff coming to a typical executive on any given day is a lot. And that doesn't matter if the leader of your company or the company that the person's leading is 10 people or 10,000. If it's 10,000, it's more. But even if it's 10, it's still a very busy thing for this individual who is, in that case, wearing a lot of hats, as well as being chief decision maker. So there's a lot of stuff coming at them. They are busy. Their time is at a premium. Priorities are probably shifting all the time. So you had that meeting booked for Tuesday at 2 for you to present your case, and it's going to get bumped to next Thursday at 9:30 a.m. You hope, because something shifted in their priorities.
And you only have 5 minutes.
And you only have 5 minutes. Use your time wisely. And there's just pressures. So there's these pressures that are coming, they're shifting priorities. And in the case of a publicly traded company, and this is really important to be aware of, the executive have quarterly assessments. And we could have a whole conversation about why that sucks. But it's just the truth. They are measured every quarter. There's a quarterly report that goes out and all these financial and operational measures that go with that. And if you're an executive, again, you're going to be compensated on what those numbers say. And unfortunately, what your shareholders say. That's a political statement. We'll leave that for another day. So in that environment, where do you find the clear space? Where do you find that little space that you can get that person's time? And how can you hold their attention? So when you create something for executive review, approval, consideration, you need to think about, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. Number one, be brief. Say what needs to be said and say nothing else. If they want more information, they're going to come to you. But nobody wants to read a long email. Nobody wants to read a huge report if they don't have to. Say what needs to be said. If they want more information, they'll ask. Use data to back up every claim. That diversity and inclusion example is a prime one of that. Those data points, they're going to speak to the people who maybe aren't drawn to the idea of diversity and inclusion on its surface. They want the data to tell them why this matters. Use to Faye's point at the top around those 3 levers: money, exposure, and
Market.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One day I'll remember. Address those, so be relevant to the organization's goals and strategies. Because if you are way off in left field and what you're talking about, you want some attention on something that doesn't fit within their strategy for this week or this quarter or this year, they're going to say, come back to me another time. Be timely. Don't, just be aware of what your time is, what their time is, plan accordingly. And if you have deadlines, state them. You are doing everybody a favor by saying, I need your feedback by X date. Because if you don't, they will never pay attention to it. Because as we said, they're busy. They have shifting priorities. They got pressures coming from multiple places, and they've got these quarterly assessments that they have to manage. In addition to all that stuff, they manage other people, other teams. all these things. So be brief, be data driven, be relevant, be timely, and include your deadline. Hey, anything to add there?
That's pretty thorough. I'm trying to think of like, what else would we add in terms of executives? There's one thing around being brief, I think, for sure. Like, I think you're right. I mean, obviously you're right. You're right. Get to the point when it comes to your executive. Oh, I know. That's what you want to be brief. You want to get to the point. The one thing I would add is anticipate their questions because they will ask questions, whether you're presenting in front of them or you send them, the one pager because you're asking for, $100 million. So when you're designing whatever that communication could be, whether it's a report, whether it's a paper, even an email, because you're trying to explain whatever that is, and anticipate their questions and try to answer them. I'm not talking about long-winded answers, but if they get to a point in a deck, in a report, and you might be thinking, hey, they're going to ask about this. Just answer it right away so that because you're right, Tracey, like they will ask if they need more information, but you also don't want to leave them maybe doubting that, maybe you didn't cover everything. Right. So I think there's
especially the obvious stuff, right? Like if you're asking for money, tell them where that money is going to come from.
Exactly.
If you are proposing a new project, lay out for them the expenses and the timeline. Don't just say, hey, I've got this great idea that is going to bring in $50 million of new revenue, and these are the 3 things we're going to do. Yes or no, thumbs up, thumbs down. Well, that's not enough.
No,
right?
That's not enough. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that goes to like that example, speaks to, well, then what's the data? What's the surprising data or the challenge that you've discovered to support that recommendation or that proposal? So yeah, those are the things I would add.
One other thing before we get to recap that I just thought of that just might be helpful to people to know is if your objective isn't met, if you are declined, it's not always personal. It might feel personal. And I understand it might feel really personal. I put all this heart and soul into putting this proposal together and I was told no. But you might have done everything right. And you're still going to get a no because of things unrelated to your purview that you are not aware of. And maybe they won't tell you why. They'll just say, we can't approve this at this time. And maybe they won't even be nice about it. Most people are kind. The point is, even if you think you did everything right and you still get a no, you don't get your objective met, it's not always because of fault with the proposal. It could be for 1,000 things you're not aware of.
That's a really good point because market conditions change, right? Like there's a discovery on the other side of the house that we didn't know about 5 minutes ago, 5 days ago, whatever that is, right? So maybe it's a timeliness of that recommendation or proposal. I think that's a really good point. I mean, executives are always looking out. I mean, that's where they live, right? They live not just down and deep in the organization, but they're always looking out and they're being informed by the board, their advisors, the team of VPs, et cetera, and business and market conditions. So, sometimes it's just not the right time. It's just not, and we just have to try again or try in a different way.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So to recap today, to reach your executive audience and have them respond, hopefully positively to your communication, you need to take into account, number one, how they are measured, which is on those 3 areas: money, market, and exposure. And in terms of understanding the environment in which most executives are working, they're busy, they're shifting priorities, pressures from different places. So be brief, be data driven, make sure you are connecting what you're suggesting to the relevant organizational goals, and timeliness. Faye, any last words of wisdom from you?
No, I'm getting sweaty just think about working with executives. I think the other thing I would add is, you know what, like there's a power dynamic, and right, it is intimidating to work with executives, but if you have that opportunity, seize it. I mean, not a lot of people get to have their work being not a lot of people get to be able to pitch a recommendation to a proposal and have your name on it, right? Like, so use that. I know it sometimes can feel, like I say, sweaty, but it's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity to be seen if you're on that career, the career growth. I'm meant to learn from it. So I don't know, turn that frown upside down, and you'll be okay. You'll
You'll
be
be
okay.
okay. They're scary, but they're human.
So if you enjoyed this topic, Tracey and I would love to work with you, and if you want to learn more. So like I said at the top, we said we're designing a workshop on how to communicate with executives. Happy to work with you. Give us a call and figure it out. So with that, I'm Faye.
And I'm Tracey. Join us next time on More Better with Tracey and Faye.